Hey, everybody, and hey, Molly, what's going on? I'll be dancing with our new intro now. I like the music. It's kind of
It's so
cool.
good.
I know. I love it. I love it.
I
So,
love it.
thank you. Welcome, everybody. We are celebrating Black History Month. We actually been celebrating all month now, but we
Yeah.
actually have some segments today to kind of talk about what it is like for us celebrating now as the Jehovah's Witnesses versus, I mean, as former Jehovah's Witnesses, we really couldn't as Jehovah's Witnesses. We actually have a special guest to help us out with that. And then we're going to talk about the history of the Watchtower, which is not particularly stellar, would you say? And then talk about some other subjects that we felt like would be great to present today. So why don't we bring in our special guest? Hello, Simon.
Hello. How are you?
Thanks for joining us from the bedroom or the living room.
It's my studio, okay?
I'm sorry, your studio. It's his studio, girl.
This is a studio, okay?
Yeah, all right, this is our studio.
I'm not sitting on the floor next to two rabbits.
I'm
not. It's my
I'm not
studio.
sitting at my kitchen table.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sitting at my kitchen table. This is our studio, child. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Simon.
Thanks for having me. It's been a little while since I was on the show. Good to be back.
Yeah, it has been a minute, hasn't it? So why don't you lead us off? Before we get into talking to our first segment about why some ex-Jehovah's Witnesses are uncomfortable with celebrating Black History Month, why don't you talk about what it's like to even consider Black History Month as a former Jehovah's Witness versus now?
Well, I mean, I honestly feel like those two questions are kind of tied together because now, as an ex-witness, this is really the first time, first period of my life where I've actually even paid interest to Black History Month. As a witness, we were strictly told not to have role models, not to idolize anybody. So every time Black History Month came along, especially being in a predominantly Black school, there were always, showcases of our Black heroes. And these are, and a part of me felt like, nope, Jesus is the only one we should be having a role model. And, so it was kind of difficult to me. And my parents kind of really kept that going at home. I remember one time, I think I was telling you the story earlier. I won a contest in school. It was Black History Month contest, and they gave me a poster of Michael Jordan. And I went home and I tried to hang it on my wall, and my parents just had a fit because we shouldn't be idolizing anybody. We shouldn't be giving anybody undue special importance. And even from that point on. So anyway, flash forward to now, it's a whole different experience because for me, even at this point in my life, Black History Month is a time that I find personally very encouraging. It lets me know of my history. It lets me know that success is where I come from, not necessarily where we need to go as a people. Like, we have successful people in our past. Despite of how, we're portrayed, stereotyped, ridiculed, profiled, we have a rich history and a very vast contribution to this country that needs to be acknowledged.
Right. And, Molly and I was talking about earlier how now Black history includes, even our brothers and sisters of the diaspora. I mean, it's more international, although it started as a week here in America. And now we got 28 days. It's not a real full month, y'all. But how we're progressing to is more inclusive. Like Sylvia is saying here, she embraces her Blackness way more outside of the organization, and she does it year round. I just wanted to say thank you for everybody that's joining us on the Twitter. I finally got it up. If you're just joining our stream, we're talking about celebrating Black History Month versus as former Jehovah's Witnesses or recognizing it versus, before. So what do you say, Molly? What is Black History Month or celebration of, POC culture like in Hungary, if at all?
Right. So Hungary is pretty homogeneous. So most of our immigrants are first generation. So they just moved here themselves. And most of them are university students. And although Hungary is, my goodness, a very racist like environment. Like when I was a kid, making jokes about Romani or Gypsy people was commonplace, and you know they still have issues getting jobs. Some of the regions that they live in, it's still very deserted as far as job opportunities go and all that. So that's definitely still a case, but it's not really a thing here, and I think it should be because we have more and more people who who arrive in this country and who are not Hungarians, who are not white, who have different backgrounds, and I think they should be embraced. And both, white people and other people, I believe, just everyone in general should be bilaterally educated on history and on, you know, some level of basic communication and understanding that, oh yeah, some cultures will act different and they will have customs and different behavior patterns that you will, and that's cool, as long as they are not harming anyone. I guess that should be a part of education.
Thank you, Molly. I know for me, I guess it's kind of like what you were saying, Simon. Growing up in the organization, I mean, we're talking about Black History Month, but that organization we were told was like a melting pot of cultures, and that there was colorblind, right? And then nobody saw color. And the only time I really saw people embracing their cultures is in an international convention where you get to see them dress in their traditional garb or something like that. And even still then, it was kind of like a spectacle. It wasn't like something that we embrace on a daily basis because, I mean, I happened to be in a congregation where there was a Hmong population, and then there was the Greeks, two Greek congregations across the way. I used to serve in not serve, but I used to, serve in a Spanish territory in Florida. So I was familiar with one. So it was like you're in the organization because of there are so many cultures, you get to see other, but I never saw the Hmong population like wear their traditional garb or embrace their culture in public. Or did you, Derek? Or you? I mean, Simon, the Greeks, like,
No,
were they particularly proud? I mean, of their
no,
culture either?
it was almost like they tried to hide it. I remember, like, after the meetings, sometimes we would go up to them and ask them to share their language and teach us a few words, and it was almost like they were embarrassed to do so. You know, it was like they were trying to just fit in, and just fit in with how we lived our life. And I mean, it was kind of awkward for them. It was a little awkward for us. I think it would have been a lot better if they had just been allowed to be themselves, and we just accepted them as they were. But they were trying to minimalize their ethnicity to better fit in with what they thought was I guess the norm.
Yeah, which, I mean, we think about it's an American cult. It was based here in America, so you have to dress Americanized. I mean, like in the 80s and the 90s, you could not wear afros. Like, braids, would be okay. Like, we grew up in a Black congregation, so braids was kind of often. But when we move into like suburban areas, we would get like during the local needs, like flip flops and just things that we would normally wear. Even when you think about the Watchtowers, even when they tried to display ethnic or hip hop clothing, it was like, what, 80s? It was so dated and behind.
Yeah, they would have big flannel shirts and be outside smoking cigarettes with bandanas on.
With
And
low glasses.
yeah, with the big shades on. But I mean, like even now, the way I like even wear my hair, something simple as that, like it, my hair is a
Yeah.
lot more curly. It's longer. It's a lot more in this natural state. But in order to give talks, in order to be out in field service, in order to have any sort of privileges in congregation, you can't have facial hair. You can't, as a black person, you can't have anything that resembles an afro or hair that's sticking too far away from your head. Even though a lot of white brothers had longer hair, but it was okay for them. But for us, it was like everybody had to have buzz cuts, and it was
Like he
just
was in the
something that,
army.
yeah.
No, I'm just looking at Jordan's comment. He said, even being in the inner city and being in the congregation that was 99% black, being proud to be black was not a thing at all. Of course, it was not.
Yeah,
We
yeah.
were proud to be Jehovah Witnesses, and that is absolutely it. He also talks about
Okay.
him not being able to get a phase. So I'm feeling a little kind of way from our brothers on the stream today. We got Simon and Jordan talking about Jordan saying he couldn't get a fade. Simon's talking about he couldn't get his Jordan poster.
Yeah,
Wow.
it was a poster of Michael Jordan, and he had on a number 12. Michael Jordan had only wore the number 12. I'm not a big Jordan fan. Okay, I'm from Michigan, and
In
I was
Detroit, obviously,
yeah,
right? Yeah.
I was anti-Jordan, but I recognized greatness when it was there. Anyway, I had this poster of him. He had on a number 12. He only wore that one time. It was 1990. It was a Valentine's Day game, and it was a rare collector's edition. Like I say, I won this in school, and yeah, my parents made me throw it away. So, yeah, we
Oh
couldn't
my God.
we couldn't idolize anybody. We couldn't uh, even autographs. It was kind of weird. We would go to watch the Detroit Pistons play, and there was one time my father, he had season tickets, and he had like a little meet and greet thing. So I got to meet at the time the Pistons rookie was Grant Hill, so I got to meet him,
Oh wow.
and I wanted to get an autograph, but my father wouldn't let me because he said that would be idolizing him.
Oh my gosh. And see, here's the thing. Like thinking that's horrible, by the way. I mean, we couldn't really idolize anybody. And I'm thinking about like even during Black History Month, like my mom was a little bit more progressive. Like she didn't like pull me out of classes that would talk about it or anything like that. But like the more militant characters or militant activists that she felt were more militant, like Malcolm X and stuff, that was off limits. We could not read anything about Malcolm X or the Black Panthers or anything like that. We barely could read something about Martin Luther King because he was a pastor.
Yeah, because he was a pastor, right? And they thought that his speeches had a religious undertone to it.
Yeah.
Goodness.
Sylvia says she can relate. Her Jehovah Witness parents are from the Caribbean, and for a while, all of us seem to be ashamed of our culture for the most part. We never really showed it off to other Jehovah Witnesses.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's sad because Caribbean is such
Right.
such a rich culture there, and
Yeah.
in America, especially, we call ourselves like a mixing pot country where we're supposed to be made up of all these immigrants. But the second that you start to highlight your background more than what they feel like, America is being highlighted, they have a problem with that. And the witnesses were almost in a same way. Like, you couldn't highlight any sort of other background than just, your relationship with Christ, your relationship with Jehovah. I mean, it's like they only wanted to hear one thing about you, and that's how your current life is with Jehovah, not where you came from, what your ancestors accomplished, any treasures or any thing you take pride in outside of the organization couldn't be mentioned.
Well, I feel bad. We were both run a Jehovah Witness group of 12,000. We just hit 12,000 today. Yay. But it's mostly like Nigerian and Zambia, the makeup of the group.
Mm-hmm.
And it just makes me sad that that they are putting on suits and big old looking like this American coat. And I mean, some of them still wear their garb, but for the most part, they're dressing like they see the men in New York dress versus adopting their own culture. It's kind of sad to see.
It was the strangest thing. I remember looking in the yearbooks, and you remember the pictures of them like crossing rivers, wearing suits and stuff. It was like holding their book bags up over their heads.
Yeah.
I mean, no one else dressed that manner. It was totally a Western way of dressing, but just because they were part of this organization and this one true organization, they adopted something that didn't even fit over there.
It's very true. It's very true. So now, why don't we get to our segment where we're talking about why some Jehovah, we talked about, I guess we kind of talked about why some ex-Jehovah Witnesses would feel uncomfortable celebrating Black History Month, because number one, we're just not used to it, and all the factors that we talked about in the first 15 minutes or so. But I want to talk about the fact that there are some ex-Jehovah Witnesses in our community that just are anti talking about anything Blackness, or anti talking about any cultures outside of American culture, or I'm told White History Month should be a thing, white culture. Molly, you just saw how they was tripping on some of my posts now.
Well, okay, so from the perspective of an uneducated white person, I'm going to assume the best and say maybe, just maybe, you're not a racist, you're just uneducated and don't realize that there is no such a thing as white history or Black history. The reason why there is such a thing as a Black History Month is because the way Africa and its people and Black people, after being in one way or another emigrated from Africa, so the the diaspora, be that during the transatlantic slave trade or otherwise, the way history was written is against the success of Black, indigenous, and brown, and otherwise, people of color. So,
well, they say, like we talked about this earlier,
right,
the victors write the history anyway. So I mean,
right.
obviously here in America, we have to elevate Black history because our captors is the one writing the history.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that it can cause, it's like how some men get like antsy and jumpy when they hear the word feminism. It's because it has the word female in it, and they think that, oh my God, women want to rule over us, which is not true. But then also, you do admit that there's an imbalance then. So you're afraid of the roles being switched. So you do admit that there is some kind of privilege that you experience, do you?
Right.
Is that the issue? And I guess it's mainly American and British white people I see who are like this. And it's like, do you not know your own history of marching down to Africa and putting African people on, slave ships and forcing them to do your work for you?
And then people think it's mostly about the slave trade. Here in America, we have a unique history, even with the diaspora, because we don't really have an immigrant experience. I know that history books and people call it an immigrant experience, but no, it's not an immigrant experience. Our people were kidnapped, raped, colonized, brought, stuffed into boats, and the ones that did make it here, they were enslaved. Their children were enslaved for generations upon generations upon generations for almost 400 years. And then we had to go through the period of Jim Crow, of being less than human under the law. And then we're entering into an area where people say Black Lives Matter is the civil rights movement of our time. I will say that about ex-Jehovah Witnesses being uncomfortable, let's just keep it real. Some of them is because I think that they don't have a lot of context for it, because a lot of these Jehovah Witnesses, the white ones anyway, who seem to have an opinion, seems to be like international or like not from America and don't have context for the slave trade at all. Or they have, like Sylvia said, a lot of it is not ignorance. A lot of them are, is just plain. And then, a lot of us grew up in congregations where they probably weren't around a lot of Black people. Because I know here. Go ahead.
Yeah, and it's like they purposely did not highlight our history. I mean, I knew as a 10-year-old, I knew so much about concentration camps over in Germany. I knew about purple triangles. I knew about Anne Frank. I mean, these were things that wasn't part of my history, but the reason I knew about them is because we were taught that at the hall. We were taught about, as I
Right.
mentioned, the purple triangles. We were taught about how these people were struggled and treated bad for their faith. And as a black person sitting there, you can draw a lot more modern comparisons to being mistreated, to being, profiled, to being just basically having systematic laws set up against you in your own country. And that stuff was never touched on. Only time, well, you'll probably talk about that a little later, but I mean, it seems like the only times that black people were acknowledged in the Watchtower was in a really racist way.
It's really true. And I just want to flash some of these comments across the stream before we go to our next segment. Okay, so, and I want to also give a shout out to a few people on our live who talked about, Sylvia's talked about her having to feel like she has to educate. And Molly, you was in some of these wars with me. So this particular person is saying that basically hashtag White Lives Matter, White History Month. He was just
Oh,
so pressed.
this is the bozo who. Oh yeah.
Yeah, all history is important. What if I promoted White History Month?
And there would be nothing wrong with him doing that.
But what is white history? White history can be German history. It can be.
Let's give them some white history. Okay, here's what white people did on a global scale. They went to other continents where they were not invited to, and they colonized them, pillaged, raped, and robbed them of their own achievements and accomplishments and crops and valuables such as diamonds, oil, or spices, herbs, animals, otherwise. And when they stopped complying, they killed some more. That's what they did with the indigenous peoples of Australia, over in the Americas, in Asia, where they tied people to cannons and got them hooked on opioids for tea so that they could rob them. That's what white people did. I don't see anything worthy of celebrating in that. Sorry, not sorry.
Here's the thing, like, I don't understand if, I see people celebrate Irish history, German, American history, all types of history outside of, Black history. And I never go on their post and troll like during when they celebrate St. Patrick's Day. Well, what about Martin Luther King birthday? I never do that. And yet I feel like that some white ex-Jehovah Witnesses have a hard time. They will believe anything else about the Watchtower. The Watchtower abusive. The Watchtower enables child predators. The Watchtower, and all of these things may be true. But try to shift their perspective, or try to let them see that, there might possibly have been racism in the Watchtower. They get bent out of state and they start defending the Watchtower just like a Jehovah's Witness. And let me just say something, like my particular experience, during the so-called white flight in Detroit, when they say the white people fled Detroit and went to the suburbs. Well, we kind of have like some of like a black flight. And I would say like the early 2000s, a lot of black people start moving out to these suburbs. And my parents and I moved into a congregation, actually primarily where I live now, but moved to a congregation. And back then when we moved there, they would get talks from the platform about how racism is wrong and how you have to not be prejudiced and how you have to embrace other people's cultures. Like, for that to be a local needs part, if you're a Jehovah's Witness, you know that those local needs parts are only for, needs of the congregation. Like, they trying to address basically, address something that they feel like is going on in the congregation. So for that to even be a part, or the circuit overseers having to talk about it often, it was obviously not just a problem that we just thought of. And we would have trouble working out with people on field service. They wouldn't invite us over. Eventually they broke the congregation up and we had to go our separate ways. But it gave me a hard lesson in no, the congregation is not colorblind. That kind of goes into our next segment. Ronnie says, as a Black person who grew up in a white world outside of the Kingdom Hall, looking back at Black history had me ashamed. And you do feel a sense of shame. I know, like, as a Black person, like, the fact that I embrace Jehovah's Witness culture over my own culture, but you're taught to do that. Like, they say that you speak a pure language. They even try to rip your language away from you. Like, they all want everybody to talk the same, to look the same, to act the same. So our next segment, actually, this goes a good segue into this, about the racist history of the Watchtower, and one of me and Molly's favorite segments called Dunkin Religion. We're dunking on the Watchtower today. And we're going to talk about the racist history of the Watchtower. Where should we start? We have a few clips here. This one here is really interesting because it talks about how the Watchtower, this particular section is Black Jehovah's Witnesses wrote complaining about a March 1st issue in the 1900s, where they made it very clear that they only wanted white people for certain volunteer assignments. So late in here, the Watchtower is responding in this particular clip, saying that as many as 100 of Black colored brothers and sisters wrote in to complain about it. And then they said that their conclusion was that Black people have less education than whites anyway, and that they wouldn't profit for them to have all those magazines. As a matter of fact, in the congregations, it would be better to give them half of the literature than basically white congregations would have, because they would go to waste, because there's no evidence that they could read it or could understand it, because whites were, basically superior. So there's that.
Yeah.
And then we have a few others. I would just encourage you to go out to my page. And if you guys want to see any of these up close, this one is talking about how they, the color servant is faithful. And, they was talking about how, servitude of the Black man basically was a good thing, and that there was a curse. Use that infamous scripture that Christians use, that, somehow Canaan was the cursed servant, the Black race is cursed because of that. I wonder who started that. That is crazy to me. Now, that is really racist.
What's also messed up is when Christians try to be like, but the Bible was never used to justify slavery. And I just look at, American history, and I'm just like, you gotta be shitting me. Like, they literally, like, the Bible doesn't condemn slavery. If it gives instructions on how to, it's like, it gives instructions on how to treat your slaves. So in one word or another, it does condone slavery. Like, I don't know how to tell you, Boo, but your holy book condones slavery. And there's nothing much more to say about it, because what else can you say at that point? If there are instructions on how hard you can beat someone, then it's obvious. Oh, you can beat them to this limit.
Was called, Thomas Jefferson had what is in museums called a slave Bible. Like, he took everything, all the passages out of the book except for the slave passages. Obviously, because he was a slave owner. And this is the same Thomas Jefferson, y'all, let me drop a little tea, that I would say violated, because I know that slaves did not have the ability to consent to sex back then, who virtually, sexually assaulted or raped his slave and had fathered other children. Her name was Sally Hemings. So anyway, yeah, so on one end, you have the Watchtower. This is another one here where Blacks are protesting the fact that they had to watch the photo drama in a balcony, like they had a cuddle line. And the Watchtower says basically, you know, you can see it up there. It's just as good from there. The white people didn't want to be mixed with the black people. Basically, you know, why are y'all complaining? So why are you offended? And it just made me think. There was in the last article, there was 100 black brothers and sisters, they said. And this one, they said it was a few hundred. So there was a section of black people within the Jehovah's Witnesses during this time of trying to get equal rights on the outside of the organization. They were also trying to do it within the organization too. I thought that was interesting that they felt comfortable enough to protest.
Yeah. Yep.
So it must have been bad. On top of the fact that they had segregated congregations during Jim Crow. Like somebody commented just recently that they were surprised that in the 70s that it was still segregated congregations in the South. That wasn't that long ago, y'all.
No. And a lot of these articles, excerpts that are taken from these watchtowers, it just goes to show how the writing crew continued to use that rhetoric that was common of a racist world. I know we like to, well, as witnesses, we used to like to say how we were a global brotherhood and, you know, we don't have problems with racism. But like I say, just pick up a Watchtower 1950 and just see how they spoke about people of different races. There was Charles Tess Russell who spoke about New York. He said the Irish rule it, the Jews own it, and the Americans pay for it. You know, it was like he was offending everybody all in one sentence.
Wow.
They
not
spoke
to mention, although that was not Russell but Rutherford
by
that time, but not to mention that Rutherford was like in cahoots with Hitler. Like he sent a letter to Hitler being like, "Hey, my dude, good job getting rid of the Jews for us. Peace."
Yeah, because there was a rumor that he was trying to fight that the Jews were paying for, like, were bankrolling a Watchtower. So in that letter, he was basically
I made a video on my YouTube channel about the craziest Jehovah's Witness teachings, and in my research, I found this very interesting nugget that when after the Second World War, Israel was formed, the governing body was like, "Oh yeah, that's the sign that the final days of the final days are coming because the Jews are all going to one place now." And I was like,
well, we can talk about how they felt about Jews and how the anti-Semitic language all day long. But when it comes to the racist history of the Watchtower, it seems to me that ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, not to go back, they have a very hard time, some of them, the white ones, shifting their perspective that what they were sold, just like everything else with the Watchtower, was propaganda. Right. Okay, of course, it's easy to say that whites and blacks getting along when you're putting them in a park with some tigers and a bunch of other kind of stuff. This is the pictures that you see as a born-in Jehovah's Witnesses when they're telling you over and over, there's unity, we get along, we don't see color, people of all races, da 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 da. This is what you're fed from a young age over and over and over. Yeah. And then when you leave the Jehovah's Witnesses, I know a lot of white people may not agree with this. Some white people rather may not agree with this, but white people can walk into a world with their privilege, whereas a black person, for the first time, you're walking out of this Jehovah's Witness bubble and realizing maybe you don't see color, but the world sees it. And you are a black person in this, you know, a black man, a black woman living in America. And it becomes very real for you when you're on a job, when you're at the school, whatever, your daily life. You know, the first time I was called an N-word was when I moved out in the burbs, like, by a white person. And it just, I don't know what it did to me. I mean, it probably didn't sting as much as it would have my grandfather, who had to walk through back doors and drink from separate fountains, and you know, in marches and stuff, you know, for civil rights and stuff like that, and being spit on and all of that. But still, I mean, as a black person, being called an N-word is, I mean, because you know, you don't get called N-words in the hall. I mean, so
right.
I mean, one of the issues is, I guess, what you said is the color blindness, and it's like anyone who says, I don't see the big deal about, representation or uh, Black History Month or Latin Heritage Month or Chinese New Year or all of that, and how the news is framed when when depending on the skin color of the perpetrator when a crime happens, or when something like coronavirus um, is happening now. It doesn't need to be explicit. Like, you don't need to say, I want to kill all the insert group of people here, but
Right.
you can still have that same bigotry and insensitivity and bias, and this I don't see color is just as bad as saying you're racist. Like, stop. It stops you from acknowledging issues and the concerns of Black, brown, indigenous, and
And when
Asian
people say
people.
that, yeah, it's like you're gaslighting Black people of color. You're gaslighting Black people because this is our experience. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Maybe you don't see color, but other people do. And our experience is that we get disproportionately killed by the cops, whether people want to hear it or not. Our experience is that we are underpaid on a job still, Black men and Black women. And the list goes on and on. Like uh, Simon was saying earlier, just systematic laws or principles and things in place that makes it harder for you as a Black person, just period. It's just, and then a lot of, again, if you are not from America, I just, other than you, Molly, and a few others that I talked to, I'm just telling you, the ones that I have, international people who don't take the time to seek out to learn about the transatlantic slave and learn about systematic racism and really immerse themselves in trying to understand the needs of Blacks and people of color and what we're actually protesting and fighting for. It's really hard because they only have the Black immigrant experience, and in their minds, hey, they're treated okay, but so they don't have any context for Blacks being mistreated over here the way we have been, in so many ways over, centuries. But we are going to go ahead and move on to our next couple segments about Blackfishing, cultural appropriation, and Black and queer solidarity and what that means. And before we do that, I want to give you the last word on this. Anything you might want to talk about, what we talked about so far, Simon.
Well, just thanks for having me. I've really been enjoying this Black History Month. A lot of the facts that you've been posting have, been my first time actually, um, knowing some of those things, and just like I say, just to know that Black people.
We can't hear you. You dropped out for a
Have
second.
been.
Okay. I'm sorry.
Oh,
There you
okay.
go.
Well, a lot of things that we take for granted now in this country, the basic building blocks were invented by Black people, and it's nothing wrong with taking some time out to highlight that history. As far as the people who say, hey, there should be a White History Month, if you feel that strongly about it, then that's something that you have every right to try to voice and try to get that to happen. I think that may be like throwing a cup of water in the ocean, because all the history that we do teach has been white history. So I think that's why they won't necessarily get a month dedicated to it. But again, I'm not here to advocate one person's background over another. I'm just saying that there's enough room on this stage for us to highlight everybody's background, for us to appreciate where everybody came from, the sacrifices that everybody made to make life better. And once you come across people who are resistant to that, once you come across people who just want to continually see history from one perspective, that's generally when trouble comes in, when prejudice comes in, and you see that a lot, even especially with XJWs. They were never forced or encouraged to examine the histories and the backgrounds of different races. And now when they're in a position to have freedom to voice themselves how they truly feel, a lot of times it's racist, a lot of times it's sadly violent. And it's sad to see, especially from a group of people who, like I said, we considered ourselves as not being racist. We consider ourselves an international brotherhood. But sometimes when people are left alone to their own ways, then those things come out. But anyway, I'm appreciating Black History Month. Thank you guys for having me on. This has been a joy.
Yay! Thank you for staying as long as you did and giving us all of your wonderful insights. If you want to catch Simon next, the XJW Cafe, along with our couple with Molly, Chessa Mannion, and Matt McMillan, we will be doing a second episode, actually recapping our episode with our interview with Raz B. If you missed it, it was on King Jive's platform. We also streamed to the XJW Cafe. But if you want to catch all the comments and the rich discussion, I would suggest that you go to King Jive's platform. I'll go ahead and put the link here below. We were able to have a panel interview with him and discuss child sex abuse in the organization. He's accusing 2 Jehovah's Witnesses who happen to be celebrities of child sex abuse. So you'll see Simon next, and us on a Molly and I on another panel for that episode on March 6th at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And so we look forward to that. Simon, seeing you on that panel interview. Thank you for all your rich insights today.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
All right. Well, that was nice. It's usually just me and you, Molly.
Hey.
It's just, and the bunnies. It's always just you, me, and the bunnies. And it was kind of nice to have, I guess, his perspective, especially as a Black man and all of that good stuff. And, I kind of like him a little bit too. So that actually works too.
I think you should date. I think that should totally work out.
I will try to get his number after the show and see how he feels about that. But yeah, so girl, so the rest of the next segment might get a little messy. Okay, but me and Molly is with the shits. We are with the mess.
Don't mind if I do.
Don't matter if you do. And then we're gonna close out on a positive note about Black and queer solidarity, what that means. And Molly has a great story about, and I want to give it away, but she wants to talk about the history of a Black slave who she's talked about it before on our show. But that's going to be a nice segue into talking about what our next episode is about next week, about Black trans lives matter too. So y'all, we doing it up for February with Black History Month. We're trying to keep it in the family, and we actually are going to dive into more about me and Molly was talking about this morning, LGBTQ issues and civil rights matters. June is going to be a great month. That's all I'm going to say.
Oh, yeah.
So now, Blackfishing and cultural appropriation. Now, do you want to start off, my dear? Let's talk with the cultural appropriation, then we can circle back to Blackfiction.
Okay. So for cultural appropriation, the best definition that I found is when a dominant culture, such as like a German, white American, or a Hungarian, so someone from privilege takes an aspect of another culture, usually of Black, Indigenous, Brown, or otherwise, Asian culture, without crediting those people or without regard, and without regard to the history and the background, such as afros and braids and bindis and special ornaments from the Middle East or India, and the kanjis from China and from Japan, or the fox-eye trend where they like sellotape their eyes to look more slanted, and yeah, they take aspects of usually Black, indigenous, brown, or Asian cultures, and they get
So
praised for it.
yeah, versus they get praised for it versus people of color, Black people being demeaned or looked down upon it. Like, a white person thinking it's cool to wear cornrows and appropriate it. And it's one thing about appropriating the culture and also appreciating it at the same time, because some Black people don't have a problem with it. But you can tell it gets a little bit sinister when people are profiting from Black
Mhm.
culture, profiting from, certain things where we couldn't as Black people because we're looked down on, is viewed as ghetto or whatever. Like, for instance, like some people think that, well, there is a conversation rather in our community as to whether or not it is cultural appropriation to use AAVE, American, our vernacular, or to use drag slang. Because when you think about it, in the remember how it was popular when Madonna came out with voguing? You know what I'm saying? Like, she was accused of like appropriating LGBTQ culture for profit. And then when you think about, I think, our vernacular, African American women in particular, we're kind of like symbolic of strong femininity. And it's almost became a way for gay men to, a lot of African American gay men who grew up in single parent households and just grew up around a lot of Black women, there's a conversation as to whether or not, that is appropriating female, Black female. If anybody can talk about appropriation all day long. I guess the key is intersectionality is the key. You know,
Right.
and you want to appreciate somebody's culture, and like, even when people use African American vernacular English, saying "bay" or using "that," and just using words that is trending, is usually associated with African American people, but the point is, when we use it, it's also associated with the undesirable parts of society, like I was talking about earlier, like poverty and
Right.
drugs, violence and gangs. And when white people or white corporations use it, it's like they're co-opting it for the cool potential, but don't give anything back to the Black community that created it. That, to me, is the line. Like, you have to give a nod to appreciate other people's culture. You can't just wear people's culture like it's a costume. That kind of like with blackfishing,
Right.
wearing your hair, napping your hair up, or changing your features to look more African when you white as I don't know what, to
Right.
basically co-opt the way that we look and say that you're like this chick right here. Sorry.
Oh my God. Exactly.
She's famous for this.
Like it's just weird. Like, why would you? And I guess I don't know. Maybe if you actually go to a Black hairstylist and ask them for whatever reason, because braids, I think they look aesthetically very good, but I also do know that I wouldn't get them for the history of it. It's a protective hairstyle for Black and brown cultures, and I know that they use it to communicate, and that it's an important
And can I just
expression.
say one thing about AVVE? People who, what we call in our community, try to talk Black or speak Black. That's what we used to
Right.
call it. To me, it also crosses the line when you try to use a dialect that's not your own. Like, I can't even explain it. Like, trying to use a broken dialect in a way that it comes across that you're mocking the culture as opposed to appreciating it. You know, I don't know if you
Right.
know what I'm talking about. There is a difference, believe me.
Oh,
There's a
I
difference.
get what you're talking about. Like, yeah, there is this when someone is trying to mock gay men, there is this tone that they hit,
Yeah.
yeah, if your your tone crosses that line, I think that's the point because we all learn foreign languages from a source, like a person from media, and I know that I guess we mentioned this before, but many gay people and queer people who are in the community, they will kind of have this dialect or this way of speaking that's close to AAVE because like we discussed earlier on, it's a part of um, queer history that it was mainly Black and Latino people who created and carved and paved this way for modern gays, modern queer people of today to be here, be able to express ourselves and being able to have these rights. And I think that's a great thing that we share this history with so many people, and I think it should be acknowledged. And if you're a gay person and you're racist, I'm not sure what you're doing, but you should definitely not be using the vernacular because then you don't know your history, honey, and you definitely don't appreciate where your gay culture and gay style and voguing and ballroom scene and drag comes from.
Right. So that actually kind of moves us right to what we're closing out with today. Ali and I have been open about since she acknowledges the challenges of the queer community being able to acknowledge the roots of their culture being rooted in Black culture. And I noticed that in Black culture that it's really hard for us to be embraced the LGBT community in a lot of sectors. We can be considered homophobic or transphobic. We kind of decided that outside of our ex-Jehovah Witness activism that we would kind of band together these ideas and form a group called Black and Queer Ex-Jehovah Witness Alliance. It's a group to promote understanding between the two very different cultures, but also that also has a lot of intersectionality in it too, because you can be Black and queer, and it's a lot of different. So anyway, our next step is talking about Black and queer solidarity and what that means. And Molly is kind of actually touching on that, but I wanted to bring up the picture to kind of go along with what you're saying today. And I'm just going to kind of flash it throughout because I don't want to cover up Molly. So, but Molly, why
Yeah.
don't you tell us what we're looking at here?
Yeah, so that is William Dorsey's one. And he was born into slavery. However, above that, he was the first person to lead a queer resistance group in the Americas. He was the first person to be called a queen of drag or a drag queen. He coined the term. And he was the first house father, or as he called himself, the queen, the first house head of houses similar to what you could see in Pose, led by house fathers and house mothers. And he was the first to organize drag balls and drag races, dressing up in silk dresses and garments. And actually, after his death, his brother took over that mantle, and they were the first to organize dances, and they actually organized these events to help not just the gay or queer Black people, but their fellow brethren who were in that same situation of being enslaved, and they were actually arrested for keeping an indecent house multiple times in the late 1890s, which was code for I don't know what you're doing, but it seems gay, so you go to jail. Back in the day. So actually he was the one who laid the foundation down for gay liberation and drag culture and ballroom culture with voguing and dancing in the big, garments like you can see in Pose. So when I say if you're gay and a racist, you don't know your history, this is what I mean. Because how can you proclaim yourself to, oh yes, I'm gay and I'm for, the liberation and the equality, and let's not be, delusional, because sadly racism is alive and well in the queer community too. We're not exempt just because we're a minority, and it sadly is, and it shouldn't, because many of the gay people I know, including me, because of the media we consume and because many of the representatives, the positive representatives anyway, of queer culture are Black or Latino, our culture is very much based in and around, the New York, like New
Ballroom
York inner
scene.
city culture in
Yeah.
ballroom, yeah, because sadly, and I guess that would be true to this day to my statistics, if my memory serves, but sadly, Latino and Black young queer people and trans people are still homeless and
Yeah.
in need of shelter at a higher degree than anything else. And the average lifespan of a Black trans woman is roughly 30 some years.
That's
So,
crazy. And I
so
think we were talking about earlier or on the last stream about how I think 14 transgender women, Black transgender women, have already been violently killed already this year, and it's not even March. Okay, it's just February. We're 2 months, a little into 2 months into the year, and already there have been violent deaths. And then I think that is going to be a great segue to our episode next week, where we're going to platform a person who is very passionate about what Black trans rights mean and how Black trans lives matter too, to address and talk about the overt homophobia and sometimes transphobia undercurrents that you see in our media, Black media, whether it's songs, whether it's
right.
movies, whatever. Like even in the street, like I know of my family members that were extremely homophobic. They would go out of their way to intimidate gays and call them the F word. And like growing up with the F word, it was just almost like, like I don't know, like it was just another word in our vocabulary. Not that I used it, but I know that our family did. So I think that's gonna be a great episode. Again, that's Black Trans Lives Matter Too, the modern civil rights struggle.
And
And
also,
go ahead.
if anyone is interested in actual representation and good representation, watch Pose. I'm not
Yeah,
even joking. Pose is based around the 80s and early 90s ballroom culture in New York, and it addresses sexism, racism, transphobia, homophobia, and actually it has an all Black, trans, and queer cast in front and behind of the camera, and actually the main actresses, or some of the main actresses and actors, grew up as teens in the ballroom scene, like they were actually in the ballroom scene themselves, and they actually hired Black ballroomers of the old and the new age to make that series, and the writer director is a gay man himself. So it's actually a very good series, and it touches on various historic events like the AIDS epidemic and the Stop the Church protests, and redlining as well, which is something that I think white people need to educate themselves on, because it's something that's overlooked when we talk
Yeah,
about systematic
that's good.
racism.
As far as movie recommendations, I am going to be watching the Black Panther inspired movie.
Mhm.
It just came out like a couple days ago. Everybody is kind of going back and forth about the fact that the Black actor is not an African American and that he was not a son of slaves. And there's this big debate about whether or not people who are son of slaves, daughters of slaves are here in America, whether we should have representation in these movies as opposed to immigrants like British actors who, don't have roots here. So, but I do think that this particular actor, he was in, I think, Get Out and another one, is a
Oh,
very
Daniel
strong actor.
Kaluuya,
I forget
isn't
his name. I can never say it.
I think he's Daniel Kaluuya. Um,
So on top of that one, I want to recommend that one. And then on Martin Luther King's birthday this
mhm.
year, the FBI released more tapes
Wow.
of them following around and basically trolling him and being dicks under Hoover, the FBI guy or whatever, head FBI guy.
Yeah.
But in this movie, they center the movie around the harassment that Martin Luther King was enduring, and kind of raised some other questions about, about our heroes. Even Martin Luther King, he was a great man, but is it okay to sanitize him in such a way that he's like Jesus Christ? I mean, in a way,
Mhm.
could he have been in adulterous affairs? I mean, he could have been a smear campaign. It could have been, but even if he was, does that take away
Yeah.
from his accomplishments? I mean, I
I
don't
guess,
know.
I guess while we're at ruining heroes, I'm a ruin too for y'all. One is Gandhi. He was kind of a um,
Gandhi was a racist, but I do admire his work, some of his
also
work.
that, but even worse is he actually slept with kids, not the sexual way, but he made little kids like sleep next to him to see if he can avoid temptation. So he was kind of a, you know, and Mother Teresa, who actually kind of sort of inadvertently killed loads of queer people by throwing them out and mistreating them, and actually her work caused more damage kinda than use. So sorry.
Speaking of heroes, anyway, right?
Mhm.
It's so funny that Mike Simon mentioned that earlier in the stream, how we weren't allowed to have them. But I mean, that is a very real reality as a Jehovah's Witness, that you are told to admire your example, Jesus Christ. Anyway, we are wrapping up our stream. We thank you so much, you guys, for joining us. Molly, I had a good time as usual. Always talking to you have such great insights. Being able to get a different perspective is always so refreshing, and I love it that you have an informed opinion.
I
You
so
know,
love our little chats on and off screen.
oh right, all and off screen, yeah, yeah, yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. I think it's great to be able to bring to life what we have off screen.
It
If
really
people
is.
only,
It's
yeah, if
amazing.
people only knew, like, it's not a job for us. We don't do this for clout. We don't do this for whatever. Like, we really honestly enjoy each other's company. So that's always cool.
Amen.
All right. So next week, guys, don't miss us. We will be interviewing a very special guest. And then after that, we will have an episode again on March 6th where we are, the episode with Black Trans Lives Matter is next week on the 28th. And March 6th, we will be talking again about, sorry guys, I didn't mean to flash that, talk about RASB, our protest efforts there. And then we're going to have a special ex-Jehovah Witness Atheist Roundtable right after that, where we kind of discuss our views and how they have expanded as far as like spirituality and religion after leaving the Jehovah's Witnesses. And so thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Ronnie. We love you. Thank you for joining us. And I'm sure we're going to talk after the all the comments that we didn't get to. We'll definitely respond to you guys after. So thank you, and we will going to say bye.
Bye.